You ever find yourself sitting on the couch, phone in hand, just staring at nothing, and immediately feel a little shame creep in, like you're doing something wrong by not doing anything at all? That small tightening in your chest isn't random. Most of us never question why it's there. We just let it linger, a quiet accusation, and yet, here you are, watching this. And that feeling probably just flickered across your mind. There's a deeper pattern here, one most people never notice. I remember a Tuesday last year. I had a day with no meetings, no deadlines, no urgent emails, and I couldn't sit still. I paced my apartment, half cleaning, half checking my phone, my brain restless. By evening, I felt exhausted, not from anything real, but from the guilt of doing nothing significant. It's a subtle signal, almost imperceptible, that somehow being idle is morally suspicious. And yet, sitting there, I realized I wasn't alone. Most people I know experience this. We're trained unconsciously to measure our worth and productivity. But why does the simple act of resting trigger a judgment so swift? It feels like it comes from inside us. Imagine a friend you rarely see, and they tell you they spent the weekend doing absolutely nothing. You probably think, that sounds nice, but when it's you, that same act feels like failure. Cognitive patterns hardwired by culture and upbringing tell us work equals value. Even a short pause is suspect. You glance at the clock and flinch. Time itself becomes a kind of supervisor. I used to joke about being busy as if it were armor, but the truth is, hiding behind busyness is easier than confronting the uncomfortable space inside that wants nothing but quiet. Most people think they dislike idleness, but maybe what they actually dislike is facing themselves without distraction. Last week, I caught myself scrolling through social media while lying in bed, half watching a documentary, half thinking about what I should be doing. A subtle trigger kicked in when I realized I hadn't cooked a proper meal yet. There was a fleeting judgment, I'm wasting my life. But as I watched the screen, I noticed a pattern. My mind leapt from task to task, imagining obligations that didn't exist, creating pressure where there was none. Psychology reveals this is not uncommon. Human behavior tends to fill empty spaces with self-generated stress. The moments we carve for nothingness, our brains almost sabotage. And isn't it strange that our own thoughts can make idleness feel like failure? I sometimes wonder if this comes from early lessons. A parent sighing when we were daydreaming, a teacher frowning at a slow moment in class. Subtle signals embedded deep, shaping decision-making without our conscious knowledge. And as I thought about it, I realized I've carried this through adulthood. Even a vacation can feel tainted by guilt if the calendar has empty spaces. Why do we assume that movement, any kind of doing, is inherently better than stillness? Researchers suggest it's a blend of societal expectation and internalized authority. And yet, quietly, almost rebelliously, those small stolen moments of rest whisper something different. They hint at freedom, at a life unmeasured by constant output. One evening, I watched my neighbor, an older woman, sitting on her porch at sunset. She wasn't doing anything. No phone, no book, no activity. And yet, she looked content. I felt a pang of envy. It's that cognitive dissonance. We recognize the value of rest in others, but deny it in ourselves. I remember thinking, maybe this is why our culture talks about self-care endlessly, but rarely practices it. Most people interpret rest as indulgence. Yet, even the smallest pause is a mirror, showing us how we judge ourselves silently, moment by moment. And then I realize, maybe the guilt is not about rest at all. Maybe it's about seeing ourselves without distraction. Have you ever noticed that when you finally allow yourself a quiet moment, your mind starts rehearsing all the tasks you could be doing? That mental rehearsal is not harmless. It's a subtle kind of stress, one that convinces you to move before you've truly rested. I caught myself doing this last Sunday. I had the whole afternoon free, no plans, nothing urgent, but I still found a reason to tidy, to scroll, to plan the week ahead. And the more I moved, the more exhausted I felt. The pattern revealed itself slowly. Our discomfort with rest is less about laziness, more about accountability to an internalized, invisible judge. And it's fascinating, if you notice it carefully, that feeling in your chest isn't random. It's a signal that your brain is running a script, one you never consciously wrote. And it's not just about time, it's about identity. We define ourselves by output, by constant engagement. Sitting quietly feels like peeling away a layer, exposing something vulnerable. I've noticed in myself, and perhaps in you too, that brief guilt often masks a deeper anxiety. Who am I when I'm not producing, performing, moving? That question flickers in the corners of our minds, subtle but persistent. Most people think the answer is obvious, but if you pay attention, it's not. The script continues, quietly dictating how you live, how you spend your few unguarded moments. And the more we resist it, the more profound the realization becomes. Perhaps resting isn't the problem. Perhaps the problem is the story we've internalized about what it means to deserve peace. I remember lying on my back in the park once, watching leaves move slowly above me. For a moment, nothing tugged at my attention, nothing demanded urgency. And then it happened, a quiet flicker of guilt, a thought asking why I was wasting time. Why does stillness feel illicit? Why does the mind rush to justify its own quiet? In that moment, I realized I wasn't relaxing. I was negotiating with myself. That's when something became clear. This discomfort has a shape, a familiar one, a cognitive pattern that activates the moment activity stops. Most people don't notice it because they rarely stop long enough. We fill space with noise, with tasks, with scrolling. Even silence becomes something to manage, and rest starts to feel like failure disguised as indulgence. Yet, in that stillness, there's clarity. When nothing distracts you, you hear the rules your mind has been following all along. There's a contradiction hiding here. We crave rest. We talk about balance. We consume content about slowing down. But when the moment arrives, we sabotage it. I've watched myself do this, sitting down to relax, only to check the time, wondering if I've earned this pause. That question alone says everything. Human behavior doesn't resist rest. It resists the loss of justification. When you're busy, your existence feels validated. When you're still, you're just there. And for many people, that feels unsettling. For a long time, I thought this was laziness, something to correct. But the more I paid attention, the more it revealed itself as conditioning, a subtle tension in the body, a restless mind, a feeling that something is wrong even when nothing is. These are emotional triggers, not failures, traces of expectations absorbed over years. You can feel them if you notice carefully, the way your shoulders tighten when you pause, the impulse to move, to prove usefulness. Yesterday, I sat in a cafe with nothing to do. No laptop, no phone, no agenda, and the urge to reach for distraction was automatic. Every few minutes, a thought appeared. You should be doing something. You're falling behind. It felt absurd, and yet familiar. That's the power of internalized rules. They don't shout, they whisper, and they shape decision-making without ever asking permission. But as I stayed there, something shifted. I started noticing people. The quiet confidence of someone reading slowly. The calm of someone doing nothing at all. Have you ever noticed that guilt often appears when expectation has no clear source? No one is watching. No one is demanding. And yet, the pressure remains. That's because it's not external anymore. It lives inside, repeating patterns that shape your life quietly. I recognize this in myself. The way I create small tasks just to feel legitimate. How movement becomes a shield. and rest becomes exposure. When you're still, you meet yourself without performance. There are moments when the guilt fades. Brief ones, early mornings, late evenings, when the world slows down enough that productivity loses its voice. In those moments, I've noticed something important. The mind doesn't need fixing, it needs witnessing. The discomfort isn't asking for action, it's revealing structure, a map of how worth, time, and identity became entangled. Psychology reveals this through observation, through noticing what happens when nothing happens. I once had a friend admit they felt ashamed for taking naps. They laughed when they said it, but their eyes didn't, and I understood immediately. That quiet shame is shared, almost universal. It's rarely talked about because it feels irrational, yet it's deeply human. You can feel it. The internal resistance, the urge to justify rest with productivity. And maybe that's the most revealing part. Rest doesn't feel uncomfortable because it's wrong. It feels uncomfortable because it removes the roles we hide behind. Worker, achiever, doer, leaving only presence. And presence has no scoreboard, no metrics, no audience. It simply exists. That can feel terrifying or freeing, sometimes both at once. So the next time you find yourself doing nothing, notice what arises. Not to change it, not to fix it, just to see it. The subtle thoughts, the body's reaction, the quiet tension. These are not enemies. They're signals, reflections of invisible systems running beneath the surface. And in observing them,